Cost and reliability are just two of the issues senators have to consider when it comes to the state's energy resources. Another topic is the environmental impact of the energy facility and its byproducts. With me now is a senator who keeps the idea of clean energy front and center in this debate, DFL Senator Nick Frentz. Senator, welcome to Senate Spotlight.
Thank you for having me, Veronica. Good to see you.
Thank you. Senator, the push for expanding nuclear energy seems to be tied to the goal of making the state carbon-free by 2040, which is something you have long advocated for. Talk to me about that goal. Who set it? Why are we trying to reach it? And is that even possible?
Well, first of all, thanks for having the discussion. We're looking at carbon-free by 2040, which is a bill I chief authored in 2023 because of basic climate change concerns. The planet's always had an atmosphere which traps heat, but over the industrial age, we're trapping it faster than we would like. And in the same way, we're concerned when a baby's temperature goes from 98.6 to 101.6. We're concerned when it looks like the planet's temperature might go up 2 or 3 degrees. And of course, like the baby, beyond that, now we're really concerned. So satisfied that carbon emissions are the main reason that heat is being trapped, people around Minnesota, around the country, around the world are asking, what are the ways we can reduce carbon emissions? The energy sector had historically been a huge emitter of carbon emissions. Think coal burning and the like. So our 2040 goals are our way in Minnesota to say, in the energy sector, we're going to go to 100% carbon-free or carbon neutral, if you like that term better, by 2040. The reason nuclear is having a continued examination is twofold. One, it's a carbon-free source. I know we'll talk a little bit about nuclear waste. We'll talk about the risks and rewards, but it is carbon-free. So wherever you had nuclear power before, it's got to rise up in the mix that you see for Minnesota. And the second reason, of course, is that Minnesota has a nuclear moratorium, basically preventing the Public Utilities Commission from issuing a certificate of need to even build new nuclear. And there are legislators on both sides of the aisle who are interested in talking about that moratorium and potentially lifting it. That's how we got here today.
You mentioned the nuclear moratorium, and there's a bill out right now that hopes to lift that. But, you know, there are other renewable sources that are currently allowed in the state, like renewable sources such as wind and solar. So talk me through those options, benefits, drawbacks. Are they being considered?
They sure are. Glad to report that wind in particular is growing in our mix in Minnesota. So think of 100% of how we generate energy. Wind is now up close to a quarter for some of the utilities. It doesn't require fuel. We don't have to drill in the ground for it. We don't have to mine it in the mountains. It comes basically from wind in the same way solar does. They're intermittent resources. The sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. So the limitations of wind and solar are that they're not constant. A direct contrast to nuclear, which is a firm resource, meaning it can be dispatched at any time with the flick of a switch. Those are the considerations, and you mentioned cost. That's a big one. While the cost of wind is coming down, causing utilities to buy more of it, the cost of nuclear has bounced around a little bit. And in the last 10 years, other states have seen real cost overruns with nuclear. So whether or not you feel nuclear moratorium should be lifted, there will still be the issue of cost.
You mentioned that for these renewable sources, you know, we don't need fuel, and fuel is a big part of the conversation. Talk to me about that toxic legacy that people say when it comes to nuclear energy, that you know, spent fuel remains radioactive for 200,000 years. Do we have any modern solutions for that waste?
Well, we thought we had a solution in the United States, which you may know is the federal depository at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. But in the 1990s, that idea basically got shut down, and we now don't have a federal solution for the storage of nuclear waste, leaving the states, those that are interested in nuclear, to fend for themselves. Here in Minnesota, what we've done for Xcel Energy, which is the only utility that uses nuclear, is we've allowed them to store it at Prairie Island, where the Prairie Island Indian community is now the closest community in the country to nuclear waste. The concerns we have are the ones you mentioned, which is that it has a radioactive life of about 200,000 years. So a state senator would have to be reelected about 50,000 times in order to be around for the end of that. And we're concerned in the same way we're concerned by people who live on the side of volcanoes or who live where forest fires are an issue. We are not expecting things to happen, but they do sometimes. And so it poses health risks for those that are not exposed to nuclear radiation. There are no health risks, and of course the vast majority of the country has not had any exposure whatsoever.
Yeah, you just brought up health risks, and that was something that a testifier brought up during a recent committee meeting. What data do we have on the health risks posed by nuclear energy?
We have some, and the exposures which can increase the risk of leukemia come almost entirely from those that are seeing prolonged exposure to radioactivity. A person who's nearby a nuclear disaster, Chernobyl, Fukushima, for example, or someone who's been exposed for an extended period of time to radioactivity in a nuclear facility, like volcanoes, like being struck by lightning. The numbers of those people is extremely low, but for them, it poses a serious health risk. Each of our energy comes with certain risks. When we mine coal, we have trucks that go back and forth. They get in accidents sometimes. We have other risks that we bear the cost of, and we're trying to balance those with all our energy sources.
We talked about health risks to people, but talk to me about the environmental impacts we might see if nuclear power was expanded here in Minnesota.
Well, for context, we run 2 nuclear facility sites, Monticello and Prairie Island, with 3 reactors total. They account for a significant percentage of the energy produced for Xcel Energy, which is the state's largest utility and investor-owned, meaning they run it for profit as opposed to a municipal electric company or a rural electric co-op, which I'm a member of in North Mankato. The way that we look at those risks are similar to the country France, where they have, I think, 18 nuclear reactors, and they sit next to Germany, which has 0. France says, yes, we have risk, but that risk is worth the benefit. Germany says, we prefer not to take that risk. And right now, Germany's electric costs are higher, in some places significantly, so consumers, which is a translation for humans, voters, taxpayers, whatever you like, are making their own decisions, and most of the constituents in Minnesota are interested in nuclear, notwithstanding concerns about cost.
You mentioned some of those risks. Are there any recent innovations that we can point to that has made nuclear energy safer?
Great question. Yeah, over the last 30 years, as those disasters in Chernobyl and Fukushima have come to the front of the public consciousness, first of all, light has been shined on the fact that American historical safety is already somewhat advanced. Think double walls, things that prevent radiation from escaping even if there is a core meltdown. So American nuclear reactors had advantages already over Chernobyl in particular. With those disasters and with what humanity's learned from them, there's innovations in the way we recycle nuclear waste. There's innovations in the monitoring, think artificial intelligence, to try to prevent the worst disasters from happening. And I would analogize those to the same safety improvements we've had in a lot of areas of American life, automobiles, manufacturing. We're safer, we're just not entirely safe.
Watching these committee meetings and listening to testifiers, it's a highly passionate topic for people on both sides. What do you say to those people who are, sharing their concerns?
Well, I'd say that each one of us is just as important as every other one of us. So those that are more opposed to nuclear, I don't try to talk them out of it. I'd say, welcome to the committee. Please present your testimony. Like the unknown for humans, think of a 5-year-old who's a little more worried about a monster under the bed at night than a bowl of ice cream. Humans are worried about nuclear. We've had nuclear bombs dropped on humans in this planet in the last 100 years. And so people worry. And the fact that some worry more than others, that's part of the deal here at the Capitol. And it's part of why we try to get all the voices out in front. The majority of Minnesotans are cautiously optimistic that nuclear will be a part of our mix. And you probably know, Veronica, we cannot reach our 100% goals by 2040 without the nuclear that we have on the grid now.
Senator, what do you think will happen in this space this session?
I think you'll see movement towards nuclear. I'm not positive, and I chair the committee, so we have proposals to have so-called advanced nuclear be studied. That actually passed the Senate Energy Committee that I chair last year unanimously. Every Democrat and every Republican said, let's study advanced nuclear, sometimes called small modular nuclear. I think that'll be in the Senate omnibus bill. There are other bills which would entirely lift the moratorium. That's less certain and would require the consent of not just Prairie Island, but Xcel Energy has said, without Prairie Island support, they too would not support it. And as the only operators of nuclear in Minnesota, Xcel Energy's partnership can be pretty important. It will not move without those two parties.
Senator, any final thoughts you'd like to share on this issue?
No, but we encourage people to reach out. Senators and representatives love to get emails. It helps us kind of have a sense of what people think in our districts. So thank you for giving a little bit of time for the subject. Looking forward to seeing the rest of the session play out.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time, Senator.
My pleasure, Veronica.